Hello, welcome to European UFOs and a Happy New Year to all of you. You've all been really supportive last year and I'm really looking forward to an exciting 2024. We will kick off the new year with a closer look at one of the core issues surrounding what we call ufology, namely the question, what constitutes evidence? For the most part, our understanding of UFOs comes in the form of narratives such as Mr. and Mrs. X were driving down a deserted country road when they saw strange lights in the sky and had an episode of missing time. Usually, such eyewitness accounts, if they can't be falsified right off the bat, are considered evidence for the reality of non-human intelligences traversing our skies and abducting us at will. But this isn't without problems. The validity of eyewitness testimony has a long history of research within psychology, and results are pretty unambiguous. What people think they saw often isn't what they saw. Notably, there's a strong resistance among some ufologists to accept this, but decades of peer-reviewed research is pretty unambiguous on the reliability of eyewitness accounts, not only when it comes to UFOs, but also crimes, etc. So, what do we study when we study UFOs? Here, with me to discuss this question is Dr. Jean-Michel Abrassart, a psychologist, a UFO researcher, espousing the so-called psychosocial model. According to this, much, if not all, eyewitness testimony on UFOs is reducible to mundane explanations, unexplicable within our current scientific paradigm. We explore a few case studies, such as the Belgian UFO wave of the late 1980s and early 1990s, to illustrate this problem. Finally, Dr. Abrassart and I disagree, albeit amicably, on how and to what degree other categories of UFO evidence, such as official government documents, might really point to something very strange going on in our skies. So stay tuned and let me know what you think about the nature of UFO evidence. Hello, Dr. Abrassart. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, it's very kind of you to join me on what is, at least in Berlin, a very gloomy Saturday morning. I hope wherever you are is more sunny and already heading towards spring.
I'm in Belgium, so it's not much better.
Well,
it's kind of the same.
Well, fair enough. But we've got some very interesting thoughts, topics to talk about today. So hopefully they will bring us into better, at least mental conditions. So I always start my episodes by asking my guests this, and I think it's always a really relevant question. What is your background and what subjects are you particularly trained academically? And above all, what got you hooked onto the UFO phenomenon?
Yeah, so my main area is psychology. So I have a PhD in psychology, and I did my PhD on the UFO topic, which is quite rare, I suppose. But yeah, that's my topic on the psychology of UFO, belief and witness, kind of a mix of both. And also I have a master's degree in philosophy, so I also have some training in philosophy. Of course, I'm very interested in epistemology and subjects like that are related to this topic.
And how did you get interested as a philosophy graduate and then a PhD in psychology in the UFO phenomenon? Was it a particular aspect of this? Like, I think especially in animalistic psychology, abductions are a big topic. So was it through that angle that you came into this field, or how did that emerge?
No, actually, so as I said before, I'm Belgian. And of course, I suppose most of your listeners will know that there was a huge wave in Belgium in 99, 92. And I was a teenager at the time, around 14, 15. Now, I didn't see anything in the sky, even though I was in the right area for that. But I was fascinated at the time by the way the media covered the topic. It sounded kind of uncritical for me, the way they approached it. But there's lots to say about how media covers UFOs anyway, in general. But then that sparkled my interest. So I'm sure we're going to talk more about it. But of course, at the time, there was an organization called sceptics who studied the UFO wave. Was The suburbs tended to be more and more skeptical before the UFO wave, but when the UFO wave started, they reverted to more in favor of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, especially the main. Well, of course, it was a small group of people, but I mean, the main voice, if you want, was a physicist called August Mason, was very, very convinced of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. So he was very active during that wave in the media to talk about it and so on. But I was exposed to the UFO phenomena through that through that time. And when I went into psychology and philosophy, at some point, of course, I had to choose a subject for my first for the end of my master for my short thesis, and I was starting to get interested in the skeptical movement and how they approach the UFO phenomena. So I decided to work on that. I wanted to work. I mean, that time was a different time. It was like the 90s, beginning of the 90s. So there was the beginning of internet, but internet was not what it is today. So it was very, very hard to find skeptical information at the time about the UFO phenomena. So I wanted to go to try to see what I could find on the subject and go deeper that way. So that's how I started with my short thesis at the end of my master that I already did about the same topic, like the psychosocial model, if you want, of the UFO phenomena. And then after that, I moved on to I did some research in the laboratory of psychology of religion, but I studied the psychology of paranormal belief, and then I did my PhD. That's how it went.
Excellent. So it's basically the kind of mass media, I suppose you could almost call it hysteria of the late 80s, early 90s in associated with the Belgian UFO wave that got you hooked. I think I also remember it, the Belgian UFO wave, and I think it's one of those, for many ufologists, seminal cases in Europe that we're going to touch on later. But perhaps from the outset, could you perhaps describe or elaborate on what you mean by skepticism? Because I'm sure, as you well know, many of my listeners are probably wholeheartedly convinced that there is some ontological, i.e., objective truth to the UFO phenomenon. And I think the experience they've probably made is, if you talk to your wife or your husband about UFOs and they're not particularly convinced by it, they are already confronted with a rather skeptical position. So a lot of people would probably argue that the standard point of view in our society is one of skepticism towards paranormal and UFO phenomena. So could you perhaps elaborate on what you mean by skepticism?
Yeah, I think the easiest way would be just to explain a little bit what I think the psychosocial model is, because I think the skeptical position. So there is a movement called the skeptical movement, and I think the skeptical movement, the position of most of his members don't care about UFOs, but those who do, they tend to espouse the psychosocial model. So that's the way I call it. Usually in English, it's on Wikipedia, they use psychosocial hypothesis, but I didn't like the word hypothesis, so I changed to model. I don't think hypothesis is the right word for that, because I think we have enough proof or data to show that it's not a hypothesis, but a model, a way to explain it. But anyway, the way to call that model is subject at debate anyway. There's no very good term so in France, in Belgium, There was discussion about how to call it anyway, but some other French writer called Claude Moget called it the reductionist composite model. So it's a reductionist because you reduce the phenomena to prosaic stimuli, and it's a composite because we reject the idea that there's one explanation for the UFO phenomena. There's a plethora of there's many stimuli that can generate a UFO observation. So he chose that word. Well, I decided to go with psychosocial model because it's more aligned to what it's already used in the Anglo-Saxon world. But yeah, in France, some people think that reductionist composite model is better. Anyway, so that model, I mean, it's a way to look at the UFO phenomena, and I think that is different from the way UFO believers, let's use that term, or UFO proponents look at the UFO phenomena. So I think we're almost in front of two paradigms, right? Two different paradigms. So it's a paradigm, if you want. So that's why I use the word model instead of hypothesis. It's a way to look at the phenomena. And for me, the way I like to explain it, I even wrote a book for children in French, where I explain that for primary school students. It's very easy to understand. I say the UFO phenomena is like a stack of hay, and some people think there is a needle in it. I'm not convinced there is a needle in it, but we're not sure. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But as a skeptic, for me, the psychosocial model, we don't really care about the needle. We care about the state of the hay. I mean, sorry, I'm not. English is not my native language, so, but we care about the hay. So, and we are interested to explain why so many people think they saw a UFO when we're sure they didn't actually. So we know for sure that most of the sightings are not alien spacecraft. We know. In France, there is a French organization studying officially the UFO for the government, from the equivalent of NASA, and they have a very good database. I haven't looked in a few months, but last time I looked, I think the truly unexplained case, so that means case that we really don't know how to explain so far, that have good data. So we are not able to explain them because we don't have the data. We have good data, and they're really strange. It's like something like 3%, okay, of the database. So I'm like, as a skeptic, the stack of hay is the 97%. Why so many people think they saw something anomalous when actually we know they didn't? So that's I would say that's, for me, that's a way to explain what the skeptical approach of the phenomena. I think that aspect, why so many people think they saw something when we know they didn't. They saw something anomalous when we know they didn't. It's fascinating as a psychologist, or as someone working in the human sciences. And there's really something to study and there, beyond the is there a needle. And to reply to your first question, why did I do my PhD on that, is like, I'm somehow frustrated by so many people who study UFO phenomena by focusing so much on the quest for the needle. I'm like, the rest is so fascinating. Why are you so? I know I don't. It's in a way, of course, I know why, because they're hoping there's something truly anomalous. But it's kind of in a way I have some kind of frustration. I'm like, the UFO phenomena as a social phenomena is really truly fascinating. So why not study that, right? Also.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for explaining this. So, the psychosocial model, which, to be honest, before preparing for this podcast, I wasn't really familiar with. I think I've heard of it before, but never really had the chance to explore it a bit more deeply. So, could you perhaps take us through its different components? Because from what I understood, it's a layered model. So there are different explanatory layers that can either kind of be used distinctly or in conjunction with one another to account for phenomena. So could you just basically on a high level take us through these different layers?
So one of the reasons people object to skeptics or people in my way of looking at the phenomenon don't like the word psychosocial model is because it makes people think that it's purely sociological and psychological, when obviously most of the time there is a physical stimuli in the sky. So that's why that vocabulary is sometimes rejected. But of course, there is something in the sky. And just for me, when I chose to went for that word, I'm like, okay, we know there's something in the sky, but the phenomena is mostly in the head of the people and more than what's really in the sky. So the models, in a way, state that there are several things that can explain an observation from a psychological and sociological point of view. But the first is what we call simple mistake, and that's the vast majority of people. The simple mistakes are people see something in the sky and they just don't recognize what it is. So that means that they will describe the object quite accurately, just they completely fail to identify what it is. And so we call that simple mistake, because there will be complex mistake later on. But the really vast majority of the cases are that. So we can observe that when we do field studies. So I'm part of a group doing investigation. It's called the CNEGU, so it's the committee I'm translating from French, but from the study of UFO case in the northeast of France, if you want. And that group, we study observations in that area, and we can observe that most people they can describe exactly what they saw, and it's really precise what they say. Just they're wrong about being anomalous. And then the most probably interesting part for me is that there are complex mistakes, and the complex mistakes is that for those there starts to be distortion in what the report is, and so at the end of the processes, the story we get in UFO books, if you want, the description of the object does not reflect what the object really looked like. There are some extreme cases, but in the French UFO wave in the 1950s, well, it's not a well documented case, but I like to use it as an example. It was published in a newspaper, but someone saw a UFO landed near his house, and he took a gun and started shooting at it, and it was actually his neighbor changing the battery. So,
well,
of his car.
That makes for a good neighborhood. Yeah.
But it's just interesting because it seems so absurd, but we know it happens because we in cryptozoology we have also lots of cases like that. For example, people who said we saw Bigfoot, and we saw clearly Bigfoot. It was Bigfoot. Then they bring back some hair, and we do some DNA analysis, and it was a bear or deer. So it's clear that they saw something, and in their mind it was Bigfoot, but actually, and if it's a deer DNA, a deer doesn't look like a Bigfoot. Like we start to be really in the realm of very big mistakes in perception. So we know scientifically those happens, even though I think in the population usually people think that what we see is accurate, or it's difficult to think that we can be that mistaken. But then, so we have that process from what the witness, when the witness sees something, to when it's published in a book. So the distortion or the change can happen when he perceives the stimuli. There can be some illusions. Classic one would be he's in his car and he sees the UFO chasing him, and actually it's the moon. So we all know there's a illusion of movement with the moon. Other distortion can happen, of course, because of the culture. We know what a UFO from UFO documentaries or science fiction movie, we know what it's supposed to look like. And then those people will change what they see based because of their condition, if you want. Then, of course, there's when they will start remembering it. Each time they remember, they will start changing the description of what they saw. In sociology, the classical example is someone is fishing, and then I got a fish that big, and it shows like 10 centimeters, and the following week it's that big and that big and that big, and the fish gets bigger and bigger. Then, of course, after that, there is when he's going to retell to the journalist or ufologist or whatever he's talking to, when he explains it, it's going to change. And the questions the ufologist or the journalist will ask will influence what he says. Lots of studies in psychology have shown that if you ask leading questions, you will change, the details will change. And then after that, of course, the ufologist will, or the journalist will publish in a journal or a book. And then when he explains, it's going to change again. And then you can have like the addition of all these elements at the end of the day, when what the version you have in print is extremely different from the version you can be extremely different from the version you had at the beginning, from the real objective. So as I said, I'm not saying that's all the UFO case. I'm saying it's a minority of UFO case. Most people describe accurately what they see, and we can easily find the object they actually saw in the sky. And after that, in the model, there are the false memories. No, some people, we know in psychology that some people actually have completely false memories. That's something that can be important for the alien abduction phenomena. And then it's a kind of a taboo subject in ufology, but there's also hallucinations. I wrote a paper about that. It's always it's something people saying that it's not nice for the witness or whatever, but people do have hallucination in the real world. That happens. It's not something such uncommon. So some cases, a minority, a very few, but some cases should be explained by hallucination. The fact that it never comes up is almost suspicious for me. Anyway, because of course schizophrenia or there are some psychiatric trouble that will lend to paranormal beliefs. Actually, I was investigating a case 15 years ago. I went to see the witness, and he was under medication from a psychiatrist, and his testimony was he was seeing ball of lights in his room floating above his beds once a week. And for him, it was clearly alien communications. Okay, for me, it was hallucination. But those cases don't tend to be published in the literature because of the obsession of we are looking for the needle, and that's clearly not the needle. When for me, that's part of the phenomena too, right? And so we lack information about those cases. He was completely convinced that it was alien communication and was on forums and websites to write about his contacts with alien. So here you go. That's the summary. And then there are, and then after that, the hoaxes, the question of hoaxes. That's on the last aspect, I guess.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this overview. I think so. With this case study, you just mentioned someone having a psychological pathology. I think probably a lot of UFO researchers aren't trained to even recognize that. So it's very essential to actually have people also with a psychological background studying this phenomenon. And it's always a problem I have with the alien abduction phenomenon, and going through regression and hypnotherapy, because they're exactly, and I think it has been exposed quite well by many researchers, there are leaded as the issue of leading questions, and starting with Betty and Barney Hill to more recent cases. I think it is a very difficult subject to really engage with objectively unless you have a firm backing in psychology. But anyways, I wanted to ask you about the hallucination issue here. So for me, I don't have a background in psychology, but for me, hallucinations are intrinsically associated with individuals, so it seems to be an individual phenomenon, whereas the UFO phenomenon per se is more of a collective phenomenon. So how do you reconcile these two dimensions?
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, if you have hallucinations, you should be by yourself. I mean, it's in that's why the golden standard, if you're looking for the needle, should be you should at least have a few witnesses seeing the same thing independently, not talking to each other, because if they talk to each other, they will influence each other. So ideally, you should have a few witnesses that come testify without having information crossed between them. So the golden standard. But no, in the literature, there is talk of what we call folie à deux. It's in French, but it's in English too. They use the French for folie à deux, so that means madness for two people, of people living together. So it's like a psychotic or people having really deep mental problems, talking to each other and influencing their worldview. So in that case, you could have. It's considered that they could have hallucinations, the same style of hallucination almost together. I'm not completely convinced, but in the literature, it exists. Now, the UFO phenomena is of course sociological, influenced by American culture at the beginning and so on. But yeah, but of course, people who have mental illness, they, like us, see what's available in the culture through movies and documentaries and so on, and what they will experience will be deeply influenced by their culture. So it's no wonder that some of them will either see something that is completely based on UFO folklore, or will interpret what they experience as UFO folklore. If that's what you, I'm not sure if I answer your questions.
Yeah, it's more like a terminological question, I suppose. So, just to give you a concrete example, 1997, the Phoenix Lights in Arizona, hundreds, if not thousands of people saw a huge football-sized triangle UFO in the night sky. Would this, according to your model, be a folie à deux type of phenomenon, or more kind of an illusion that's kind of overshadowed by cultural baggage and the
Yeah,
media?
but yeah, we have to see case by case. Of course, if you have many witnesses, it's a way to rule the pure hallucination. As I said, I think you cannot have a pure hallucination with many witnesses. But it's kind of, yeah, it's a fascinating question. It's there was some cults, for example, where in France there was a very dangerous cult, and we know the leader would show what was described by the member of the cult as a sword of flame, but when the cops arrested him, it was a neon tube. So you see that a group could perceive something really wrong. So you see, in some circumstances, it could be possible, but yeah, if there's lots of independent witnesses who are not connected to each other, no, of course not. They would have to be some, at least, physical stimuli. I think in the Fatima, the dance of the sun is the classical example for that. There's lots of witness, but most skeptics consider that explained by they looked at the sun for a long time, and then looking at the sun for a long time is a terrible idea for your eye, and that based with what they were expecting and what the church told them they should see. They had that impression of the sun dancing. So we are back to the idea that there's an objective stimuli, in that case the sun, mixed with the sociological situation where they are in. But I wouldn't explain that with an hallucination, of course.
So the psychosocial model it has a very significant impact on how we treat one, if not the main data source in ufology, namely eyewitness accounts. So I was just going to pick your brains on how do you make sense of the narrative, because I think it's becoming increasingly popular amongst ufologists. Always this phrase, well, the UFO was seen by trained staff, by highly credible people. Is that somehow to be reconciled with your model, or is your model does the psychosocial model predict that basically there is a propensity within human psychology to misidentify and misinterpret phenomena, and that even if we think people are credible, they may not necessarily be credible or objective observers? Because the implications for this, if eyewitness accounts are, let's say, 95% of all the data set we have, are quite significant.
Yeah, for me, credible, and it depends what you mean by credible. I never imply that the witness is lying or trying to. Of course, there's some case some people do, but that's not. I think as a skeptic in the psychosocial model, when we approach a case, we never start with the idea or the witness is disingenuous, is trying to lie to us. That's never the first thing we think. I mean, the case of hoaxery happens, but especially if someone says I saw something and he wants some people to come and do an investigation, I mean, the most likelihood is he's not going to try to deceive us. But for me, you're right, that phrase it's kind of annoying for me. For me, there's no expert. There's no credible expert people who could recognize spaceships in the sky. That doesn't exist. It's like a myth. It's a narrative that the UFO community used to justify an argument from authority that I think doesn't hold up. We know that pilots make mistakes. That has been documented. There are cases we were sure the pilot saw something mundane and he thought it was alien. So we know it happens. A phrase I often use when I want to explain that to children is a Japanese sayings, even monkeys fall from trees. So that means that even an expert in climbing a tree can fall. So it's a way to say there's lots of pilots in the world, and yeah, there are different things. Of course, pilots can make mistakes. There's lots of pilots in the world, and the psychology is like a Gauss curve in statistics, and in that curve, but at the two extreme, you have people who will see stuff, and in the middle, they won't. That's another way of looking at things. What else? Yeah, the training. They're trained. No, they're not trained. I mean, they're trained to pilot planes, but since we don't know what a true alien spaceship looks like, by definition, nobody can be trained to identify alien spaceship. It's nobody can train for that. On top of that, in the sky, they're trained to recognize other plane, sure, obviously, but in the sky, you don't have background elements to help you perceive the size of the. So you don't know if the object is close to you or far from you, and the speed is the same. You don't know because you don't know the size, you don't know the speed. You cannot guess the speed either accurately. They can when it's a plane because they know the type of plane, and then they know the size because they have seen the object on the ground. Like if I see, let's say there's a car flying in the sky, I know the size of a car, so I have a reference. But by definition, when they're looking at anomalous object, they cannot know what they're looking at, so they don't have the size, so they don't have the speed. So it's not that it's just nobody can be trained to identify objects that they don't know what it is on the background of the sky. It's not possible. Yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Yes, I think it definitely adds another layer of complexity if you're supposed to identify something that you don't actually know what it is. Definitely that is the case. And I also suppose that, again, I don't have a background in psychology, but that the psychological literature is replete with publications on misidentifications of mundane objects. I just remember seeing documentaries on telly about, how people would misidentify even the most everyday objects under certain conditions. So we probably, from, I don't know if you could confirm this or comment on this, but I think that human psychology in general and our ability to perceive reality isn't the best if you compare to us as a species on this planet.
Yeah, but yeah, like psychologists like to say, we don't see with our eyes, we see with our brains, and the brain makes mistake, right? Because we construct what we see. We have preconceived notion of what we're gonna see, and then build on that. We change what we actually see, and when what we're seeing is something that we don't know what it is flying in the background of the sky, it becomes really tricky. But you don't even have to go into the psychological literature to see that. Just think about the hunting season in your country. I'm sure every single hunting season, there are stories of hunters who have shot at people running, and they said, I thought it was a deer and I shot a guy. He was just jogging with a sweatshirt. And you're like, how could you mistake someone jogging? You see? And usually when there are those articles coming up, people say, yeah, but he must have drunk a lot. You know, he was, yeah, but yeah, UFO witness. What do journalists say about them? They must have been drunk a lot, right? So actually, it's the same kind of thing that shows that we can forget that story about being drink. But after that, lots of people drink all the time. So I'm always like, it would be strange if UFO witness never saw a UFO with having drink alcohol just before. But it's just, we don't need that explanation. It's like, and then, but we can see from those that people make terrible mistake. For hunting mistakes, it's terrible because of course they start shooting a human being thinking there are other things that humans, and everybody can see that during the hunting season in France. Every week there's a new article on that style, and it just shows how human testimonies are fiable. I mean, it's not testimonies here, it's human perception is fiable, because they have that preconceived notion, I'm going to see a deer, and then their brain change what they see. And of course the stimuli is ambiguous because it's the forest, it may be a little bit dark and so on. But it's the same thing from UFO. People tend to see UFO at night when it's possible to have a case in daylight, but usually most people it's going to be night. The condition of observation, maybe they're coming back from work, they're tired, so there are lots of factors that will interfere with their perception.
Gosh, what a depressing death. You just go for a walk in the forest, minding your own business, and you get mistaken for a deer. Not very nice. Yeah. But yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense that our perhaps limited sensorial apparatus in conjunction with a vivid imagination does lead to a lot of misinterpretations. I think that is also a trope in ufology, but one that's worth repeating because, as you said, we actually need to look at the haystack. And if there is something anomalous in that, fair enough. That the bulk of the data is the eyewitness testimonials that are often of, let's say, dubious quality.
Yeah. Maybe we should say something about memory, because the issue, as I said, it's not only perception, but it's also memory is an issue. And Elizabeth Loftus, you can look at her work. She did some amazing experiments about that. For example, she would show a videotape of a car crash, and then she will have her PhD student ask questions to the witness who just saw the crash on TV, and she will just change the wording of the phrase, like did the did the crash hard on the car, or just hit the car, or just bump the car. They would manipulate the phrasing, and just with the manipulation of the phrasing, what the witness will report will change. So it's mind blowing. But of course, that have lots of implication for police work. Often when I interact with UFO proponents, they would say, yeah, but in law, the witness can decide if someone goes to the death row, for example. That's an argument I hear sometimes. If in your country a witness is enough to send you to a death row, you have a big issue. I think you're in a country which is really problematic, But I think it's not true. First, of course, first answer: law and science are two different subjects, so you shouldn't compare like passing judgment, and the law system is not a scientific system. So that's first counter to that. And the second one, for real, I hope that in most countries, most judges and lawyers know that witness only shouldn't send you to the death row, and you should have at least a few physical, tangible evidence against you on top of witness, and not only witness. Because all those research in psychology, they are pretty definite on the question that you shouldn't. Witnesses are not enough to convict someone. But after that, of course, one of the issues is that in death row, we know some people have been convicted based on witness, and then, for example, for raping, and then decades later, when DNA analysis was available, suddenly they were released. So we know those kinds of mistakes have been made based on witness testimonies, and it's tragic. It's not something that should be praised.
No, absolutely. And as you said, we're dealing with two kind of different frameworks. So the judicial system is one that is based on a moral and, if not ethical code, whereas science, at least as we define it these days, and in Western and the Western world, is one of studying the objective reality of how the world works. So, so I'm also completely with you there that, just saying that we should. So if 95% of the data we have on UFOs come from eyewitnesses, then just saying that, okay, in court they would be accepted really skirts the issue, because, or rather, we have to think about how we want to think about studying the phenomena. Do we want to approach it from an ethical, preconceived point of view, or do we want to study it objectively and scientifically? And then these two systems don't really go too well together. Speaking of ethical concerns and so on, I just to give you a bit of a background here. So, since I've started this podcast, no month passes actually where I don't get at least 2 to 5 emails from people who are quite disconcerted because they've been in touch with anomalies. They've had weird encounters in their bedroom, i.e. abductions. And because I'm not trained in psychology, and I also don't really know what to make of the phenomenon in general. I haven't made up my mind yet, which is probably a good thing. I find it very hard to advise these people because, at least in Germany, where I'm currently based, there is no institute or no official authority where I could direct these people to. So obviously I could tell them, okay, you might need psychological help, but that will the way it's currently phrased in ufology probably be misinterpreted. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on this, because for these people, these 2 to 5 people that email me each month, it's a real visceral experience and a real problem because they have no one to turn to.
Yeah, so there's a field in psychology that's called anomalistic psychology. So it's the study of anomalous phenomena, and one can argue that the UFO phenomena is part of it. For real, if you look at the textbooks about anomalistic psychology that have been published by the APA, for example, the American Psychological Association, which is the biggest association of American scientists. They mostly focus on abductions, as you said, and not really on the rest of the UFO phenomena. But so there is an interest in psychology about the abduction phenomena, including what you're describing, which is the true suffering of those people, psychological pain they are in. And then in that field, they advocate that there should be some psychotherapy specialized in anomalous phenomena, and those psychotherapists would be presenting themselves as agnostic toward the phenomena. So they would not take position in favor or against the existence of the phenomena, but just to give psychological help to them. And in France, there is one small group who does that, who is a group of trained psychologists. There is at least one PhD and one university teacher. And their group is just, we are psychologists trained, and we have an interest in anomalous phenomena, and we won't take position about what you're telling us, but if you are you're suffering, we will try to help you. And I think for me that's the best approach, but unfortunately it's very uncommon nowadays, so it's difficult to find those. I have no knowledge of people like that in Germany. Maybe there is some parapsychology group in Germany. Maybe there is. I don't speak German, so I'm not familiar. I know there are some parapsychology group that they do interesting work in Germany. So maybe they could help you and see if that kind of person exists. No, that's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's always really important, irrespective of what one may think about the phenomenon as such, to try to be empathetic and to offer support where it's possible. So yeah, I really appreciate your answer, your openness there. Well, this is a podcast about UFOs, and we love case studies. Is there a particular case study you could kind of give us to understand the psychosocial model a bit more in practice? Because amongst my listeners, there are also active UFO researchers and who, like you, also have a critical position. So it would be great if you could give them an insight into how you would approach a case if someone called you and said, "Hey, I just had a weird encounter. Please investigate."
Well, there's been some very interesting work done not by me exactly, but by the group I belong to, and it's the SARS operation. They call it the SARS operation. The SARS is if you don't know, is a astronomical cycle that brings back the moon 18 years, a few months, and a few days, exactly in the same position that it was before in the sky. So it's not the same season. For that, you would have to wait a long time more, but it's still the same position in the sky. So the SARS operation was the idea. It happens like 20 years or maybe more than that, but it's still kind of ongoing. So the organization received lots of cases, of course, and some of them we look at them and we're like, yeah, it kind of seemed to be a simple mistake with the moon. But at the beginning, they were not sure. So they were like, it could be the moon, but we're not sure. So what they would do is that they would write the date. And 18 years later, they would contact again the witness and bring them back exactly at the same spot in the countryside or wherever it was, and show them and say to them, well, is that what you saw that night? And it works really well. If you want to replicate that other organizations, you can.
Sorry, can I just interrupt this? So is that because of the lunar cycle? So every 18 years or whatever, the moon returns to the same spot and then you can kind of have a possibility to falsify potential
exactly.
identifications.
Yeah, that's exactly that. And the name of the cycle, it's called Saros, Saros. That's the name in astronomy of that return of the moon at the same spot. So you can find easily, even in Wikipedia should have a page about it, about the astronomical cycle, if you're interested. But anyway, it's just going to tell you the moon comes back at the same position. Of course, there can be some issues with that technique. For example, in 18 years, the landscape can have changed. There can be a building now obscuring the view and so on. But in many cases, the witness would go there with one of us, and he would look and say, "Yeah, that's what I saw." It's really interesting with cases where they were in the car, and then they located the moon of the UFO exactly in some. I turned on to the right, and the UFO was to my left, and so you look on the map, and then you do the same road with them in the car, and you see the moon is exactly in the same position. So it's a very interesting way to prove that that people do mistake indeed, which seems amazing, but they do mistake the moon with UFO. It's a good scientific way to do it. So my organization have been doing that for years. Currently, they don't tend to bring back everybody to their location. Only if there's a case we're not sure it was really the moon because they've been doing that for 2 decades. So they're like, that's good. We've done it enough. We're sure. We know. We're sure people do confuse the moon with UFOs, and we know by reading what they say and looking in. You have some astronomy program. You can easily see it was in the right direction that day. And one article I published recently in the Vincent. I don't know if you've seen that book, UFO about the psychosocial model.
Indeed, yeah.
So it was published by Vincente Juan Ballester Olmos. I hope I'm not butchering his name, but that book is really interesting. If what we are talking about relates to talks to you, that's really that same kind of approach. I'm looking for where is the title exactly? What was it? The reliability of UFO witness testimony. So in that book, I have an article which is a case study. So I'm only the second writer. So it's a proposed explanation by one of my colleagues called Eric Maillot, which is one of the main, a big investigator in France, about the Amarante case. Just a quick summary. If you are interested by that case, everything is in that article, in that book, and that book is free on PDF on Academia. You don't even have to buy the book. The Amarante case was a very famous case in France because it currently, so the French, the JPAN, the official organization to study the UFO, is well managed by someone who's tried to stay neutral in the debate. So I think they do a really good job, and their teams. Well, if you don't know, that group is only one person, one secretary, and the team are just voluntary. So lots of my friends are in the team, but they're just doing that on their free time. Don't imagine it's a huge laboratory with lots of people. The laboratory is actually composed of one person, one secretary, and that's it. But then he calls for help from other investigators. But before that, in the 90s, that organization was led by someone who was really a big UFO extraterrestrial proponent, and most of us thought he wasn't critical enough, or he was not doing such a good job. And there was that case at that time that he pushed a lot in the media as being like really impressive case. And the case is one person in a suburb area, and he see a UFO landing in his garden for half an hour. And he gets close to the UFO, and then the UFO takes off and leave. So of course it sounds very impressive, but there are a few problems right away. As I said, there's only one witness, which is never good. Also, we are in suburban area with lots of people, and there are no other witness, so that's strange for a UFO that landed for half an hour. So that's the basic of the case. There was some big discussion about, it's called the amaranth. The amaranth is a kind of plant, and there was a lot of discussion because some people claim that the plants were affected by the presence of the UFO. The amaranth plant were affected biologically. That could be verified scientifically. So we discuss about that in the case too, but the analysis is not so convincing. But that's the reason why that case was also big, because people were like, we have physical proof of biological alterations of the plant, so that must be there was really a UFO there, a spaceship there. But then we addressed that, we show that the analysis is not as conclusive as people would claim it to be, but so we don't think it's true that the plants have been biologically altered. Then if we have that case, that's an interesting case. Obviously, we have one witness. So here you see, you could be tempted to say he had an hallucination, right, for half an hour. And there were some discussions in that direction with some people. There were some indications that maybe could be that, but my co-writer, so the main writer of the article, Eric Mayo, he went for okay, let's think it's not that. It's like a method. That's a good example to explain how the psychosocial model. A methodological principle is we should find something else than the hallucination or hoax. We start with at first we examine a case, we think the witness is sincere, is not lying, and it's not a hallucination. How can we explain such a case? And it was a few decades ago, so a long time ago, and actually mylar balloons were not so popular at the time, well known from the public. And the explanation we explore in that article is that actually it was a mylar balloon who came and landed on the plant, the famous plant. So that's why it was like floating in the air in front of him in the garden, and then the wind took it away in the sky. And we show that explanation can account for every single details of what is said by the witness. So that would be a mistake of that kind. Yeah.
So that would be kind of in the realm of individual misinterpretations of mundane phenomena. But then you also did some work on the Belgian UFO wave of late 80s, so 89 I think it started, went to about the mid-90s, 94. And here I guess it's a bit different because it's one of those, as we like to say in ufology, flaps over an extended period of time. So what's your take on that? How did this kind of collective idea come that Belgium was visited by UFOs come into practice?
Usually I say 89, 92, but even 92 is a little bit optimistic. Really, it was already dying out at the time. So sometimes you read dates that are really stretched away, so it was not that long. My take. So Philip Klass, which is a very famous UFO skeptical investigator, had a rule for the UFO wave to explain how UFO wave happens. And for me, that rule should be the baseline explanation, and you should try to disprove that that's That's what's going on. So so that rule is that, as I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the quote by heart in my head, but he states that when the journalist makes a population in a regional area believe that there are UFOs active at that point, lots of people will start looking more in the sky, and as they do, they will see prosaic objects that they will interpret as UFO, and then they will send that to the journalist, and the journalist will talk even more about it, which will prompt even more witness, and it's a cycle, like psychological contagion. I don't like the word hysteria for that, but psychological contagion. But at some point, it's going to peak because the journalist will lose interest and start saying, "Oh, we're done with that subject," and they start not talking about it anymore, and then the flap will go down. That's the basic curve of the class law for UFO wave, and for me, that's the baseline which people should look at UFO wave. So for the Belgian UFO wave, the Auguste Mason and co were not interested in looking at it from a skeptical point of view at all. They were looking for proof of extraterrestrial visitation. So they were, as I said, just before the wave, they were going toward more skepticism. But when the wave started, they went back into their old position. But when we look at the UFO wave, people think it's impressive, but actually, there's an argument I like to find. It's called in historical science the argument from silence. The argument from silence is when you look at something, you should consider what kind of proof you should have if that event really happened. And if you don't have that proof, you should consider that it didn't really happen. And I think there is an argument from silence to have about the UFO wave. So if there was really an alien invasion of Belgium in 1989, we should have a lot of pictures. I know not everybody had cell phones and so on, but people had a photographic device at the time, even video camera sometimes. And we should have tangible proof and lots of stuff like that. Or we just have witnesses. We have mostly witnesses. Why? Because for the pictures, there were some pictures, but they were, even by the suburbs, quickly explained as mistake with airplanes and helicopters and so on. The only picture that was weird was the Petit Rochin picture, which is the very famous picture of the UFO wave. People like me and other physicists, we said it's that picture is fishy. You should be careful. But the suburbs they put it on the cover of their book and so on. And then in 2015, the person who took the picture explained how he did it. So it was a hoax. He confessed the hoax, explained the technique. And after that, there were some weird UFO radar detection. There was with pilots from jet pilot, but they didn't see the UFO, and there were two flying, and only one of them had something weird going on, and the other one didn't have anything. So obviously, the fact that there was no visual contact by the pilot, you think it was, and one of the plane didn't detect anything. It's kind of a glitch on the other one. So it was even the suburbs in the second book that nobody read. Auguste Mason conceded that was probably in detection of a inversion of temperature of the ground on the ground. So he came back on that one. So when you look at it, all the physical evidence disappeared. Like there's almost, for something that's supposed to be huge, right? And that you should have lots of physical evidence. And actually, at the end of the day, you have nothing. So
yes, and I think this is exactly what a social science perspective can do for the subject, is basically show the power of cultural narratives. And it's I mean, Bruno Latour famously analyzed how laboratory results are always contingent upon in what kind of cultural climate we live. So, I think I think this type of thinking needs to make more inroads into ufology. Yeah, so
Yeah,
thanks.
there's one
Thanks.
argument I should address too, because it's the classic counter-argument to what I said, is that the beginning of the wave was abrupt and sudden, and the first day of the beginning of the wave, there were lots of sightings. So the beginning in open was really, that day there were lots of 100 something. So of course there must have been something in the sky that day. So it's maybe there could be some militarists or people, helicopters and so on. But we can debate what was in the sky that day. But the main observation was, so the arguments from the suburbs would be that was so quick and so intense, it cannot be sociological because people didn't communicate with each other, right? You see what I mean? They all saw something that night. So the thing is, the main observation was from two cops. So we go back to that history of that narrative of reliable observers. But I'm always like, okay, if maybe you have a high opinion of cops, but no, I'm going to joke here. But I'm always like, why cops would be so good at recognizing stuff in the sky? I don't know. It blows my mind. I can understand the arguments for pilots, but for cops, I'm like,
I'm completely with you there. I never got that argument. Never got it.
But then there was something they saw in the sky moving, and they chased the object, and then the object disappeared from view, and then they arrived near a dam, a very famous dam that I've been there many times. It's called La Gillette Dam, and the object, according to them, was over the dam, and it was not moving anymore. And they looked at it for a long time, half an hour. And that's the seminal case. But the thing is, we think what happened is that they saw something in the first phase of the observation, and then they lost sight, and then over the dam, it was not the same thing anymore. So before, it was probably a helicopter, we're not sure, something moving, but then over the dam, the location in the sky is almost exactly at the Venus spot. So they saw Venus, and Venus wasn't moving, and they said it wasn't moving, so they were pretty accurate with what they say. Just their mistake was to conflate. They thought that was the same object on the two moments. So that's the famous case. But then what happened is that case was published in the media, and then after that, the witness called the suburbs. So they read the article in the media, and then they called the suburbs. So saying that those witnesses are independent is not true anymore. You see, even if you said, if you want, the article in the journal told the people in Eupen, by the way, didn't you see something strange in the sky that night? And some people, unsurprisingly, saw something in the sky that night. But saying that the start was abrupt because there was no communication between them, it's not true. It's tricky because obviously, as soon as a journal article is published that says the cops saw that, did you see something similar? You see, it's leading the witness in one direction. And then when they call the suburbs, they're already influenced by what they read in the journal. And they say, that day I saw that, but it's already completely contaminated by the article, if you will.
So you basically, according to this model, which I think is a very good one, you have basically at the start of it a misidentification. This gets picked up by the media, and which then in turn starts this self-reinforcing cycle of misidentifications. So that's
once it started, the suburbs was really popular. The journalists, there were a group, and there were two physicists in there, so they seemed very legitimate. So the journalists will ask them about it, and they will publish article, and the cycle spiraled, until it's at some point the journalists, they're like, okay, that's good, and then it started to go down, and even the suburbs trying to go again to the journalists didn't work anymore. And that's the UFO wave. That's why I think, with what I said, I think I'm not interested in the needle in the haystack, because I don't think there is a needle in the haystack. But if you're interested in the needle in the haystack, don't witnesses are not the way to go. You need tangible proof. We need something physical. I always said, if you claim that the Loch Ness monster exists, you don't bring me witnesses who said they saw the Loch Ness monster. You have to bring me in biology, in zoology. At this time, if you think there's a new species unknown, like a monster in the Loch Ness, you need to bring a specimen, either alive or dead. Same thing for the Bigfoot. Witnesses are not enough in zoology to prove the existence of the Bigfoot. You need tangible proof. So we are in the same situation for the UFO phenomena.
I think you just said something very important, that if one is interested in that needle in the haystack, one basically needs to adopt a certain position, or or the very fact that one is interested in that needle is basically an ontological position. And I was just going to ask you about this to get a bit philosophical in the last few minutes of this episode. Do you think the approach most animalistic psychologists / parapsychologists take these days, and saying that, or even sociologists, we're treating the UFO phenomenon as something that is worthwhile studying from within our own discipline to learn something, epistemologically speaking, about how certain aspects of the human condition work? Or do you think we should really study the UFO phenomenon to get at an objective truth behind the phenomenon? So I'm just wondering, because it's something, ever since I've been engaged academically with this field, I think it's this kind of exercise that a lot of scientists do, is they're interested in the phenomenon, but they're only studying it kind of in a removed way by saying, okay, we're not going to deal with the reality of it. People may think whatever they want to think. We're interested in the effects and how it works.
Yeah, that's more about the sociology of science than anything else. I think for me, that was advised to me all the time when I was doing my PhD, to look serious. Like, if you're a serious researcher, you shouldn't address the ontological question. Just stay away. Don't take position, which is really unfortunate, I think. So yeah, for me, it's unfortunate. I think, I think I have talked about my ontological position in this interview a lot. So you know what I think, but of course, there could be a needle in a haystack, and at some point we can find some proof, but we're not there. So that's my position. I'm waiting for something more tangible that we had so far. So I'm not afraid of talking about the ontological position I have, but it was explicitly said to me by my teachers and stuff. You shouldn't do that. You should pretend to be above the crowd, like a neutral, like just like an eagle flying over the subject, and you just study. Yeah, you don't. It's like, yeah, and they say that for me, not because of methodological imperatives, but as a way to look serious when you submit a publication in a journal about that topic. If the journal doesn't want to, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's my feeling about it. Like, the journal doesn't want to take risks, so it's like psychological journal don't want to publish studies about telepathy and stuff, because it would look bad on the journal. So they're afraid if they start publishing article about the ontological aspect of the UFO phenomena, it's a risk for them, and it's easier for them to just avoid taking it. I don't know, maybe you have another take on it, but that's mine.
I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Diana Pasulka. She's become one of the big, scientific faces of, at least since 2017, and also with her recent book Encounters, and before that, American Cosmic, where she basically takes the academic point of view of a religious studies scholar. And whilst I really appreciate her work, I do find it difficult in the sense of that she's a very media-facing individual. So she's very heavily invested in Twitter or X and on various podcasts and so on. But she always has this narrative of, look, I'm a religious studies academic. I study it kind of, in a removed, neutral fashion. But then she goes on these podcasts advocating, or implying that, she's more and more convinced of that there truly is something anomalous there. So that's why I do really appreciate your candidness about this, because I find that position that she's adopting, again, nothing against her academic work, but I do find it a bit disingenuous, because either you have a certain position or you don't.
Yeah.
In fact, if I don't think science is the right platform to kind of hide that position. So
Yeah.
I'm not particularly in favor of that.
Yeah, there's most to say about that. Then there's a case like that, exactly like that in France. Actually, before me, probably was the most famous human science person talking about UFO in the media, called Pierre Lagrange, who is a sociologist. And his approach of the UFO phenomena is exactly what you describe. He says, I'm neutral. I'm a philosopher of science, and I'm going to look neutrally at the debate about the UFO phenomena between the proponent and the skeptic. And basically, his PhD is about skeptics are pseudoscientific and proponents are not, in a way. But what I had, there's lots of to say about that claim to neutrality. It's the thing is, some of my friends who have been in ufology for a long time in France, they knew him when he was a teenager, and he was already a very, very fervent believer in extraterrestrial hypothesis before starting sociology. So we all know. Then, as a sociologist, you trying to be neutral. I mean, in a publication, I can do a publication saying, in that paper, I will take that position that I'm neutral. But for real, you're not neutral. But in that paper, I will pretend it's like a make believe paradigmatic framework. I will assume that position of neutrality. But then in the media, he goes in the media and he's like, I'm neutral. But then I think that skeptics are deadly wrong. So I'm like, what kind of neutrality is that? Right? It comes. He's been deeply inspired by Bruno Latour, who you mentioned before, and Bruno Latour, in some of his writing, advocate that neutrality in a direction I understand fully, about history of science. So you say you will look at the history of the debate between two physicist camp, for example, heliocentrism and geocentrism. And obviously, you know which camp won. we know. You look at the controversy, but we know today who was right at the time. But as a sociologist, you'll say, I'm going to look at that literature and I will assume a position when I pretend I don't know who won. I will look at it and I'm going to be neutral. Okay. For historical work, it makes perfect sense to me. It's very interesting to say, I'm going to look at that literature and pretend I don't know who won that controversy, that debate. But doing that with a current controversy or current debate, I think is really tricky. And I'm kind of, I'm like you. I'm like, pretend to be neutral for something that is ongoing now. Okay, as I said, if you do one article and you say, in this article, I will do that, but pretend to do that all the time, including when you appear on podcast and you clearly take position at that point, I think it's really problematic.
Exactly. I think it's just a bit confusing and leaves people a bit aghast as to what you're actually on about. By way of concluding this, I would like to ask you what it would take to convince you that there is an objective reality that is anomalous within our current understanding of physics and the world. What would it take you to convince you that is the case? And perhaps just few thoughts on my end about this. So, as you, I do have a critical position. However, I do also think there is, and that's perhaps where we differ, an objective anomalous aspect to what we call UFO, the UFO phenomenon or UAP. And I think it's basically, if you look at the data set, we have different components. So today we talked a lot about the subjective experience part of it. So eyewitness testimony, which I said earlier probably makes up 95% of the data set we have. But I think then there are also three other important pillars in ufology, in the ufological data set, that we should consider. One of these is machine measured data. The second is authoritative official statements. So let's say, an ex-intelligence officer comes forward, says something, or we have a FOIA request, freedom of information request, when we see an official document that corroborates something or alludes to something. And the final pillar are kind of cultural traditions, narratives. These are, so the last aspect, grantedly, is perhaps goes more into the direction we've been talking about, but you could also treat it separately as kind of a cultural tradition of reporting these issues. So if this broad classification, so subjective experience, machine measured data, authoritative official statements, and cultural narratives, if that basically is kind of the way we can compartmentalize data, where do you think we would get some insights into, hey, this is truly anomalous? Because from what I gathered today, the kind of eyewitness testimony, and I'm completely with you there, is highly dubious.
Yeah, but for me, it's a very difficult question. But first off, I would say if there was something, I'm completely open to the idea that could be something anomalous as ball lightning and stuff like that. In France, there is working with that French organization official. There's a ball experts studying those, and I'm not a ball lightning expert or lightning. He's a lightning expert, and I'm not expert at all in that field. And I find what he does interesting. Some people criticize, but that's fair anyway. But I really have no issue with that, saying some sightings could be done because of some kind of weird ball lightning that we don't know yet, or some stuff like that. So there could be some needle of that style, according to me, easily. For the rest, cultural narratives, cultural narratives, I'm fairly convinced that can be explained completely sociologically. I mean, UFO knows are the continuation of fairy stories from before. I don't believe in fairies either, but they're just the continuation. Classically, before there were trolls, and now there are Bigfoots. Alien abductions are very similar to fairy stories before. That just show the psychology of humans at work is consistent through time. For me, there's nothing surprising. Just the name have changed, or the interpretation. We don't believe that they're fairies in the wood anymore, but culturally we believe that they're aliens. So that's the interpretation we currently use for talking about it. So that no. Disclosure, I'm really not into disclosure. I think it's really the completely wrong approach to things. I don't believe the US government has any special knowledge about the UFO phenomena. I think squarely the UFO phenomena is a scientific question. If an answer comes at some point, it's from the scientific community. I couldn't care less about what some American soldier knows about it, or think he knows about it, or believe he knows about it in America. I'm a little bit harsh probably, but really, the idea of a global conspiracy for hiding the truth sounds just silly to me. I mean, why the American? There's no reason China would hide. We would play along the Americans to hide. And if there's lots of UFO in the sky all the time, the Chinese should have had capture one by now. So all that stuff is just groundless for me. So it's just fascinating sociologically that there's that belief in disclosure that is very similar to the belief in end times. Next year it will come, or at some point the government will tell us the truth. When for me, whatever says the US government is losing anywhere. He will never say something that will make happy the UFO proponents. And so no, not that. So yeah, for me it would be, of course, measurements by machines that are way more objective than witness. So it will come from that. So yeah, clearly, I think
Okay.
the city and the NASA and other, they have some way to detect stuff. So that would be clearly the way to go for me. And just quickly, for me, finally, as I said, ultimately, I think, yeah, just I always say, bring me what there should be a UFO landing in front of the European Parliament, or we should have physical evidence, obviously alien technology, or obviously alien biology we can examine. That would convince me. Um, and last, and then I'll let you finish. I think epistemologically, the ufology is flawed, because looking for anomalies is a very terrible way to do science. And with the Loch Ness monster, the geographic area is limited. So at some point, we are sure there's no Loch Ness monster. It's a little bit more difficult with Bigfoot, but still, at some point, it's clear there's no Bigfoot. But with UFO, there will always be the possibility that something is there. So I think a science based on anomaly research is a very problematic methodological approach. And I prefer parapsychology because they can do laboratory work. You can do an experiment that can be replicated or not. But ufology has lots of bad points. Like the geography is too vast. It's not like a lake or the American continent or American country, the US. It's too broad. Space is too broad. And you cannot bring it to the laboratory when you can replicate. So as a science, ufology is really problematic. So yeah, I'm not expecting much. Here you go.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for your candidness and transparency here. So basically, the reason I listed these different evidential categories, from subjective experience over machine learning to authoritative official statements, is because what we're trying to do here, and I really appreciate it, is having a mutual dialogue and understanding. I think we can agree on. So this is what I mean. When we have these different categories, we can say, okay, we agree on that probably machine-based data is the way forward. And then there are also areas where we differ. So for me, for instance, authoritative official statements like the David Grush thing that's unfolding in the States at the moment, for me, that is also highly interesting and part of the puzzle. So I give a different weight to that evidential category. But so that's why I brought up these different categories, because I think we're all interested in whatever the phenomenon is, but we perhaps approach these different categories differently and give different weight to them. Well,
that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was really very informative for me, and I will aim to bring on more. I don't even know if the word skeptic is the right one, but more serious researchers. Not to say that the people I've had on so far weren't serious researchers, but also, let's say, researchers with a different academic position on this phenomenon, because I believe that the truth, if what's a highly problematical word, is probably somewhere in the cracks in between of what this phenomenon really is. By way of conclusion, where can people find out more about your work and your publications?
The easiest is academia. I have an academia page, so they can look for my name, Jean-Michel Abrassart, and they will have most of my publications there. Also, just to mention, one of the skeptic organization in Brussels, we started a peer-reviewed journal to talk about anomalous phenomena and also critical thinking. And I already published an article in French there. But if some of this listener can write in French in a proficient manner, don't hesitate to submit an article. I'm looking forward to more article in about the UFO phenomena. Also, it's a completely peer-reviewed journal, and we're open from any disciplines. If you talk about UFO from an historical point of view, from a folkloristic point of view, from psychology, parapsychology, whatever, we're open to it. And and also, for example, we received an article about the Ariel Zimbabwe case recently, so it's currently peer-reviewed, and that one will be in French and in English on our website. So anyway,
very interesting. Looking forward to reading that one. It's a case I've been always intrigued by. Very interesting. Cool. And what's next for you? Are you working on anything particular at the moment?
To be honest, I'm really working on that scientific journal that we launched like a year and a half ago. That's something I wanted to do for a long time, having a peer review scientific journal where people could publish articles on those topics. Like we had about the beast of Gévaudan also, which is a cryptid. So I'm really happy it's starting to pick up, but it's lots of work we are a team, but I'm focusing on that right now. Just reading the article, sending to the peer review. It's already a lot of work.
Well, perfect. Thanks for taking the time on a Saturday morning to chat with me about critical positions towards ufology. It's really appreciated. Cool. Well, thanks a lot, and hopefully talk to you again soon. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.